This is the Veeniix V11PRO. It is a new drone retailing for about $520, and it uses the same kind of foundational body as some of the similar to the Ruko drones that are currently out. So there are some quirks to this. I have a couple questions, and I'm also going to be directly comparing it to something also that is $550, which is the DJI Mini 3. So that way we will have a direct A and B comparison. I will say some of this stuff does chop up the preference on what you prefer. So inside the package, if you choose to purchase this, you're going to be greeted with the controller itself. It has a wired connection, so it can actually directly deliver that video feed. It's got 2 batteries, and also each of the batteries have that awesome feature of being able to charge via USB-C directly on the battery. Now, also specifically on this drone, the drone folds up in a weird way so that the propellers themselves don't fold at all. Maybe you're familiar with how DJI does it, but the propellers seem to fold, or maybe it like does origami. And in fact, for this, you just effectively pull out all the arms directly, and then on the front, you have to put down the landing gear like such. I actually don't mind this. You also get a gimbal protector and some different cables and such. So overall, not too bad. You don't get an SD card, but overall, not too bad. There is no optical avoidance sensors on this, so you're effectively just flying like you would normally. As for that flying specifically, I often found that below the trees, the drone would do the, I want to say, traditional trademark flight pattern for this kind of platform, which is kind of like would hover around an area and circle around an area. And then once you get above the trees and it's got a good GPS lock, I thought it actually stayed really steady and it did really good. For that flight time, I did end up seeing about that 40 minutes. I think I got about 35 minutes on like pretty much just hovering, and then flying around, I got a little bit slightly higher. I think it was 37. Another thing I do want to point out as well is that this drone does have to be registered. It's not that big of a hassle, but on the same time, it does have to be registered compared to something that's maybe a similar price. You could get like a Mini 3 and you wouldn't have to register it. The batteries you could get, you could swap them out for higher capacity batteries. You could get like 45 minutes of flight time, and you could do that as well. Now that does leave me under the controller, and I don't like this as much as I like the RC with the screen from DJI, but at the same time, I do actually prefer this over the RC N1, N2, or N3, whichever one DJI is preferably using nowadays. And I do like it because it realistically does feel very similar to the RC N1, N2, N3, we'll just say it without the screen. And also it does provide you additional display down here with some of the basics and necessities like battery life, etc. I do feel like the app itself could have then neglected to include those features, because ultimately I think it's a good choice to have the RC include the most important features, battery life, etc. And I think that was pretty solid as well. The controller I found to be okay. I did not like the this rotational stick actually zooms in and out, and it's just a digital zoom. So I find that it is a little, I'm expecting to change the angle, and I'm in fact not changing the angle, I'm zooming in. Maybe that's just like my muscle memory, but I did find that weird, that inclusion. I understand the RC with the screen from DJI has that issue as well.
So I actually have 2 issues I like to point out too. One is with the controller, specifically the dial on the back. When you start rotating the dial to rotate the gimbal, when you do this, there's like a wall. Effectively, if you rotate it a little bit, nothing happens. And if you rotate it slightly more, all of a sudden the gimbal is like moving at full speed. So it makes it extremely difficult to get kind of gradual, smooth shots, and instead makes it kind of jarring when all of a sudden the gimbal just starts jumping and moving very quickly. Also, in addition, when you move the drone side to side, looking back and forth, when the drone is kind of rotating the direction that it's looking, especially like horizontally, the drone video looks kind of jittery, and I can't exactly describe what's causing it, but it does seem like the onboard electronic image stabilization algorithm isn't tuned right, and it makes the footage look a little weird.
Now, I do want to talk about some of the intelligent flight modes. First one I want to point out is that DJI's Mini 3 does not have the tracking or following capability. I did find it interesting that this drone chooses to have both optical tracking, which is where the camera itself detects the person and tracks him, and it's not necessarily that they will follow you, but they will move the camera around. And then I also did notice that the The second tracking mode was based off of GPS. And it's weird because in the past they've used the GPS, some type of GPS on the controller. But that's not the case. It apparently uses the phone's GPS, which when I tried it, I was in a pretty open field underneath some trees. And I guess my phone GPS was not good because the drone then took off almost hitting a building. So I don't quite understand what's going on with the phone itself. If the GPS was just not accurate, it was a bad test. But it is limited by the quality of the GPS on the phone, and I have a relatively new phone. So the tracking, in my opinion, wasn't really usable. You had the optical tracking, which will just kind of keep the drone in place and follow you around. That was okay. If you move too fast, if you move out of frame too quickly, it will lose you. I found that it did lose me quite a bit. But keep in mind, something similarly priced will not have that capability, at least on the DJI front. So I think in order to explain the rest of my qualms, I guess, with this drone, I have to go through and explain my hypothesis about what I think is going on. So I effectively took the DJI Mini 3, and I took this drone, the Veeniix V11PRO, and I took a bunch of pictures, and I compared them. And what I found was the Veeniix drone was pulling out details that I felt like didn't reflect reality. And I'm not talking about effectively like creating things to an extent that aren't there. It felt like when I took a picture with the Mini, yes, it was a little blurry, the quality wasn't great, but I felt like it at least was showing what I thought was there, versus I felt like when I looked in and I zoomed at the pictures on the Veeniix drone, it almost looked like it was creating detail that wasn't actually there. And my assumption from that was that there was some way it's upscaled via like AI, some type of AI image upscaling. And that was my assumption, because that's the only reason I could think that it would be creating details that realistically weren't there. Now, it is a hyper like sharp image. And it's not just like enhanced sharpness. It is really also something like pulling details that aren't actually there. So, and on top of it, there is a substantial bit of noise in the pictures as well. So those two things kind of make me lean towards potentially being like some type of AI upscaling from 4K, etc., or 12 megapixels maybe. I also found the video equivalent to maybe like a GoPro 9 or something from a couple years ago. The 4K video was not as good as a lot of other drones that I've tested. I just simply put, I don't know what's going on with that. It does not look AI upscaled, but the quality on it just does not cut it for me. I feel like it's simply put just not high enough quality. It's like oversaturated, over sharpened, and I feel like I prefer to have that capability to do it in post rather than it just being out of the drone that way. It's definitely a look, but like I can compare it to like the Potenzic drones or some other drones that do a good job with a much cheaper price tag on 4K. And so realistically, you have okay 4K video, and you have AI, in my opinion, or at least my hypothesis, AI upscaled photos, and that's kind of what you're battling versus, you know, if you were to get something that's like $200, $300, like from a Potenzic Atom, for example, that 4K video looks a lot more based in reality. You could get a Mini 2 that has, in my opinion, 4K, or Mini 4K, like that has 4K video that looks better than this. I found that the photo quality, I think they took a shortcut and they just went through and made it AI upscaled rather than actually doing the work of putting a different sensor in there. And the price tag definitely seems to reflect that, but I don't feel like it reflects the quality, especially at that, like at $500. There's a lot of other options I would choose personally before I actually went out and bought this one. The range on this with the RC, with the direct wire connection or instead of over Wi-Fi, I thought was a little better. I did have some encounters, especially when I was like right next to the drone, that it would tell me to change the orientation of the antennas. And I just thought that was very weird because I would be standing like probably 5-10 feet away from the drone and it would be complaining that there wasn't enough signal. And I just also thought that was very odd. So for me, I personally thought that it was okay. Maybe if this was priced somewhat similar to the other drones on the market, maybe similar to the Potensic Atom, which is like a $300 price tag if it's not on sale. And that comes with 3 batteries. I personally just think that it's a little overpriced for what it's offering. And while yes, it's nice that it's a bigger frame, and yes, it has a little higher wind resistance, the video, especially the 4K video, is a little jittery. I don't know if it's that onboard image stabilization. It just seems a little jittery. And then on top of that, the pictures look good if you don't blow them up. But at the point where you start zooming in, you start realizing that there's details that are added that aren't quite there. And I don't know why that's happening. I don't know if there's a way to turn that off. But it just does start raising questions about that. Because especially now there's like hover drones that are coming out that they're effectively like tracking cameras that follow you around that are priced about the same. This is the Pro Max, but there are other drones that cost about the same amount as this that have 4K video, 12 megapixel pictures that in my opinion look the same. You could probably take those 12 megapixel pictures, throw them in some type of AI upscaling software, and you'd be good to go. So I guess for me, it seems odd, in fact, that this is, user-centric rather than being like environment drone-centric. But it just seems weird that there are a lot of different options, and I feel like this does not compete well with a lot of them. If you're focused on that video and that picture quality, get something different. If you're focused on, especially like a Mini 4 Pro or especially like a DJI Mini 3, if you're focused on that picture quality, and the video quality is about the same as well. I just think that it's not competitive at this price point. I think this needs to be closer to $200 to $300 for it to actually be worth it.